A flight attendant humiliated Steve Harvey because of his necklace in first class, and then discovered a truth that would destroy his entire life. You think you know how this story ends, but you don't. What starts as one moment of cruelty spirals into a nightmare of consequences that will make you question everything about power, privilege, and what it really means to suffer. Stick around to see how one man's bitter decision led to his complete and total downfall. Marcus had been invisible for 7 years. Not metaphorically, literally invisible. Every single day, he walked through airports in his pressed uniform, and people looked right through him like he was part of the furniture. A businessman would bark drink orders at him without making eye contact. A woman would actually snap her fingers, to get his attention. Children would ask their parents, "What's that man doing?" As if Marcus couldn't hear them, as if he was some kind of airport fixture that served drinks. 7 years of smiling through it. 7 years of biting his tongue while passengers complained that their champagne wasn't cold enough, their pillow wasn't fluffy enough, their seat wasn't reclined at the perfect angle. 7 years of watching people treat their dogs with more respect than they treated him. And every single day, Marcus would go home to his tiny apartment, look in the mirror, and wonder, when did I become so small? The money was decent. That's what he told himself. The benefits were solid. That's what he told his mother when she asked why he stayed. But the truth was darker than that. Marcus had stopped believing he deserved better. Somewhere along the way, the world had convinced him that this was his place. Serving, smiling, disappearing. Then came Tuesday, November 14th. Marcus was working the early morning flight from Atlanta to New York. It was a routine day, or at least it should have been. He'd already dealt with 3 angry passengers, a spilled drink, and a woman who demanded he remake her breakfast because the toast was too toasted. His feet ached. His smile had gone numb. He was counting down the hours until his shift ended so he could go home and sit in the dark for a while. That's when he heard the commotion at the gate. There was a buzz in the air. That unmistakable energy that only happened when someone important was boarding. The other flight attendants were suddenly more alert, checking their appearance, straightening their uniforms. Marcus felt it too. That involuntary shift that happened when celebrity walked through the door. Steve Harvey. The Steve Harvey. The man whose face was on billboards, whose voice came through radios, whose name meant something in the world. He walked through first class like he owned the plane, and in a way, Marcus thought he did. People like Steve Harvey owned everything. They owned the space they walked through. They owned the attention of everyone around them. They owned respect without having to ask for it. Marcus watched from a distance as Steve Harvey settled into seat 1A, the most coveted seat on the plane. The man was relaxed, confident, the kind of person who'd never once in his life wondered if he deserved to take up space. He had a presence that filled the cabin. Even sitting down, even quiet, he commanded attention. And then Marcus saw it. Around Steve Harvey's neck hung a necklace. Not flashy, not the kind of thing that screamed for attention. It was actually quite subtle. A simple gold chain with a small pendant. But something about it caught the light. And something about it caught Marcus's attention in a way that made his chest tighten. It was the kind of necklace that only a man like Steve Harvey could wear. The kind of accessory that meant something. That was something. A symbol of success, of arrival, of belonging to a world that Marcus would never be part of. And in that moment, something shifted inside Marcus. It wasn't anger exactly. It was something deeper and more corrosive. It was resentment. It was the accumulated weight of 7 years of invisibility, compressed into a single, burning point. It was the realization that no matter how hard he worked, no matter how perfect his service was, he would never be Steve Harvey. He would never wear a necklace like that. He would never command a room just by existing in it. He would always be the man, bringing the drinks. Marcus felt his jaw clench. He felt his hands curl into fists. He felt something dark and ugly rising up inside him, something he'd been pushing down for years, finally demanding to be acknowledged. The other flight attendants were already moving toward Steve Harvey, eager to serve him, to bask in the proximity of his importance. But Marcus stood still for a moment, staring at that necklace, and thinking, "Who do you think you are?" But Marcus had no idea what that necklace really meant, or what his next decision would cost him. The thing about being invisible is that you see everything. Marcus had learned this early in his career. When people don't think you're really there, when they've decided you're just part of the service industry machinery, they stop filtering themselves around you. They talk freely. They complain. They reveal their worst selves without a second thought. Marcus had heard billionaires confess their insecurities. He'd watched powerful executives cry in the bathroom. He'd listened to celebrities gossip about each other with a viciousness that would shock their fans. But seeing everything didn't make him feel powerful. It made him feel more invisible. Because what good was knowledge if you couldn't use it? What good was witnessing people's secrets if you were expected to forget them the moment the flight landed? Marcus was a repository for the world's discarded moments, and nobody cared. Nobody even knew he was there. 7 years of this. 7 years of early morning flights where he'd wake up at 4 a.m., shower in the dark so he wouldn't wake his roommate, put on a uniform that made him look like every other flight attendant, and become a ghost. 7 years of watching the world move forward while he stayed stuck in the same seat, serving the same drinks, smiling the same smile. He'd watched passengers board with wedding rings, heading to honeymoons. He'd watched business executives celebrate promotions. He'd watched families reunite, lovers reconnect, people living their lives while he facilitated those moments from the margins. He was the supporting character in everyone else's story. He was the NPC in the video game of other people's existence. And the worst part? He'd accepted it. Somewhere along the way, Marcus had internalized the message. He'd started to believe that this was all he was capable of, that his role was to serve, to fade into the background, to make other people's experiences better while his own life remained stuck in neutral. His mother had begged him to go back to school. His sister had offered to help him pay for a business course. His best friend from high school had invited him to join his startup. But Marcus had said no to all of it, because saying yes would have required believing he deserved better. And after 7 years of being treated like he didn't, it was easier to just accept the narrative. Easier to be invisible, easier to disappear. The money helped him rationalize it. Flight attendants made decent money, better than retail, better than most service jobs. He had health insurance. He had a 401k. He had the kind of stability that a lot of people didn't have. And whenever he felt the sting of invisibility, whenever he felt the weight of his smallness, he'd tell himself, "At least I'm stable. At least I have benefits." But stability wasn't the same as dignity. Benefits weren't the same as respect. On the morning of November 14th, Marcus had already experienced 3 micro-humiliations before Steve Harvey even boarded. The first came from a businessman in 2C who demanded his coffee be remade because it was too hot. The coffee was at the exact temperature Marcus had been trained to serve it. But the businessman didn't care about facts. He cared about power. And he'd exercised that power by making Marcus remake the coffee, watching him do it, then drinking it without comment. The message was clear. I can make you do things. You exist at my discretion. The second came from a woman in 1B who'd asked Marcus to help her with her luggage, then complained to the flight attendant supervisor that he'd been rough with it. He hadn't been rough, he'd been gentle. But again, it didn't matter. What mattered was that she could make an accusation and Marcus would have to apologize, would have to smile, would have to accept the blame for something he didn't do. The message was the same. You have no power here. Your word means nothing. The third came from a child in 3A who'd asked Marcus, "Why do you have to work? Don't you have a real job?" And when Marcus had tried to laugh it off, the child's mother had smiled, actually smiled, at the question, as if it was cute, as if it was a fair point, as if working as a flight attendant wasn't a real job, as if Marcus wasn't a real person doing real work. By the time Steve Harvey boarded, Marcus was already running on empty. His patience was depleted. His smile was strained. His sense of self was hanging by a thread. And then he saw that necklace. It represented everything Marcus wasn't, everything he'd never be. It was a symbol of arrival, of success, of a world that had decided Steve Harvey mattered while Marcus didn't. That necklace probably cost more than Marcus made in a month. It was casual wealth, the kind of thing you wore without thinking about it, the kind of luxury that came from a life of never being invisible. Marcus watched as the other flight attendants fawned over Steve Harvey. They laughed at his jokes. They anticipated his needs before he even expressed them. They treated him like he was special, like he was different, like he mattered more than the other passengers. And he did matter more. That was the brutal truth. In the hierarchy of human value that the world had constructed, Steve Harvey was at the top, and Marcus was somewhere near the bottom, serving drinks to people who'd never remember his face. For 7 years, Marcus had accepted this hierarchy. He'd internalized it. He'd made peace with his place in it. But watching Steve Harvey settle into first class, watching everyone orbit around him like he was the sun and they were planets, something inside Marcus broke. It wasn't a loud break. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet and cold and final. It was the sound of acceptance dying. It was the moment when Marcus stopped believing that the world was fair, that hard work mattered, that dignity was something you could earn through service. Instead, he started believing something else entirely. He started believing that the only way to matter was to make someone else not matter. That the only way to be seen was to make someone else invisible. That the only way to have power was to take it from someone else. And that's when Marcus made a decision that would change everything. And that's when Marcus made a decision that would change everything. The moment came during the beverage service. Marcus had composed himself after boarding. He'd taken a breath in the galley, looked at himself in the small mirror, and reminded himself to smile. It was what he always did. Smile, serve, disappear. That was the formula. That was the contract he'd made with the world. But something was different this time. As he pushed the beverage cart down the aisle, Marcus felt a strange sense of clarity. It was like he was watching himself from outside his body, observing his own actions as if he were a character in a movie. He could see himself moving through first class, could see the other passengers, could see Steve Harvey sitting in 1A with that necklace catching the light. And he could see the moment when everything would change. It happened when Marcus reached Steve Harvey's seat. "Good morning, sir," Marcus said, his voice steady, his smile in place. "Can I get you something to drink?" Steve Harvey looked up from his phone. He was handsome in that effortless way that successful people are. His smile was warm, genuine. He had the kind of face that had been photographed 1,000 times, the kind of face that people trusted. "Coffee, black, thank you," Steve Harvey said. And then he returned his attention to his phone. It was a polite interaction. Professional, respectful even. Steve Harvey hadn't been rude. He hadn't snapped his fingers or demanded anything unreasonable. He'd simply asked for coffee like a normal person. But Marcus wasn't thinking about the interaction itself. He was thinking about the necklace. He was thinking about 7 years of invisibility. He was thinking about the businessman who'd made him remake coffee. He was thinking about the woman who'd accused him of being rough. He was thinking about the child who'd asked why he had a real job. He was thinking about all of it at once, and it was crushing him. Marcus poured the coffee with a steady hand. Black, just as requested. Perfect temperature. Perfect presentation. He set it down on the tray table in front of Steve Harvey, and for a moment, their eyes met. That's when Marcus did it. "That's a nice necklace," he said, but his tone wasn't complimentary. It was dripping with sarcasm, with contempt, with 7 years of accumulated bitterness. "Must be nice to afford things like that. Must be nice to be important enough to wear something that costs more than most people make in a month." The cabin went quiet. Marcus could feel the other passengers turning to look. He could feel the other flight attendants freezing mid-task. The entire energy of first class had shifted in an instant, like someone had pressed pause on the world. Steve Harvey set down his phone slowly. He looked at Marcus with an expression that Marcus couldn't quite read. It wasn't anger. It wasn't indignation. It was something softer than that. Something that looked almost like hurt. "I'm sorry," Steve Harvey said, his voice calm, measured. But Marcus didn't stop. The dam had broken, and all the poison that had been building up inside him for 7 years came pouring out. "I'm just saying," Marcus continued, his voice getting louder. "It must be nice to walk through the world and have everyone treat you like you matter. It must be nice to never have to wonder if you're worth anything. It must be nice to be you." He said it with such venom, such bitterness, that it hung in the air like a physical thing. The other passengers were staring openly now. One woman had her hand over her mouth. A man in 2A was already pulling out his phone. Steve Harvey didn't respond immediately. He just looked at Marcus with those calm eyes, and Marcus could see something shift in his face. He could see the moment when Steve Harvey realized that this wasn't about a necklace. This was about something much deeper. This was about a man who'd been drowning and had finally come up for air, gasping and thrashing and taking everyone down with him. "I think," Steve Harvey said quietly, "you might be having a rough day." The kindness in his voice made it worse. It made Marcus's chest burn with even more rage. Because pity was the final insult. Pity was what you gave to people who didn't matter. And Marcus couldn't stand the idea that Steve Harvey was looking at him with pity. "Don't patronize me," Marcus spat. "Don't sit there in your expensive clothes, wearing your expensive jewelry, and act like you understand what it's like to be invisible. You've never been invisible a day in your life. You've never had to smile and serve and pretend to be grateful for scraps. You've never had to accept that the world has decided you don't matter." His voice had risen to a shout now. Other passengers were definitely recording. A flight attendant supervisor was moving toward him. But Marcus didn't care. For the first time in 7 years, he was being seen. For the first time in 7 years, people were paying attention to him. And it felt incredible. "You know what?" Marcus continued, pointing at Steve Harvey's necklace. "That thing you're wearing? It's not a symbol of success. It's a symbol of everything that's wrong with this world. It's a symbol of people like you who get to matter while people like me get to disappear. It's disgusting. He was breathing hard now, his hands shaking. The supervisor had reached him, was trying to gently guide him away from Steve Harvey's seat. But Marcus pulled away, his eyes still locked on Steve Harvey. "You think you're better than me," Marcus said, and his voice had dropped to something almost like a whisper, which somehow made it more powerful. "You think you deserve to be treated like a king while I'm treated like furniture. Well, I'm done pretending that's okay. I'm done being invisible." And then the supervisor had him by the arm, was leading him toward the galley, was telling him that he needed to take a break, that they would be landing soon, that they would need to talk about what had just happened. But Marcus didn't hear any of it. He was floating, detached, watching the scene from outside himself. He could see Steve Harvey in seat 1A, still holding his untouched coffee. He could see the other passengers whispering, recording, processing what they'd just witnessed. He could see the other flight attendants looking at him with a mixture of shock and disgust. And he could see, in that moment, the exact point where his life changed direction. He didn't know it yet. He didn't understand the consequences that were about to unfold. He didn't realize that one moment of rage, one moment of breaking the rules of invisibility, would trigger a chain reaction that would destroy everything he had. But that moment was coming, and it was going to be worse than anything he could imagine. The landing in New York was silent. Marcus spent the last 20 minutes of the flight in the crew rest area, sitting on a small bench, staring at nothing. The supervisor had told him to stay out of sight, to not interact with any more passengers. The message was clear. You've made a mistake, and now you're going to pay for it. But Marcus didn't feel like he'd made a mistake. He felt alive for the first time in 7 years. His hands had stopped shaking. His breathing had normalized. The rage that had consumed him was still there, but it had transformed into something colder, something more calculated. He wasn't angry anymore. He was awake. When the plane touched down at JFK, Marcus knew what was coming. He'd worked in the airline industry long enough to know the protocol. There would be an incident report. There would be an investigation. There would be consequences. Passengers had recorded the entire thing. Social media would explode. His name would be dragged through the internet. He was finished at this airline. He knew it. Everyone knew it. But as he gathered his things and prepared to disembark, Marcus felt something unexpected. Relief. For 7 years, he'd been slowly dying in that uniform. For 7 years, he'd been suffocating under the weight of his own insignificance. And now, finally, he was free. Even if freedom meant losing his job, even if it meant facing consequences, at least he wasn't invisible anymore. He was seen. He was remembered. He was something. The supervisor pulled him aside as the passengers were exiting. Her name was Jennifer, and she'd always been kind to Marcus in that distant, professional way that managers are kind to employees they don't really know. "Marcus," she said, her voice careful, "I'm going to need you to come with me. We need to file a formal incident report, and I need to know exactly what happened up there." Marcus followed her to the crew office, a small room in the back of the terminal where airline staff handled administrative matters. Jennifer sat across from him at a desk, her laptop open, her expression grave. "I'm going to be honest with you," she said. "What happened today was serious. You verbally assaulted a passenger. Multiple passengers recorded it. We're already getting calls from corporate. Steve Harvey hasn't said anything yet, but when he does, this is going to blow up." Marcus nodded, He'd expected this. "I need to ask you," Jennifer continued. "Why did you do that? What was going on in your head?" And Marcus realized he didn't have a good answer. How could he explain 7 years of accumulated resentment? How could he make her understand the weight of invisibility? How could he describe the moment when something inside him had simply broken? Marcus started, then stopped. "I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't pretend." Jennifer sighed. "Well, you're not going to have to pretend anymore. I'm suspending you, effective immediately, pending a full investigation. You're not to return to work until we've completed our review. And Marcus, I'd recommend you get a lawyer." The words hung in the air, like a death sentence. Marcus left the airline office in a daze. He walked through JFK in his uniform, pulling his small crew bag behind him, feeling like a ghost. People were looking at him, but not with the invisibility he was used to. They were looking at him with recognition, with curiosity, with the kind of attention he desperately wanted just hours earlier. But it felt hollow now. He took the subway back to his apartment in Queens, a small studio that he shared with his roommate, Derek. Derek was a musician, always working on some project, always optimistic about his future in a way that Marcus had never been able to manage. Derek was the kind of person who believed in himself, who thought he deserved good things, who wasn't afraid to take up space in the world. Marcus had always envied him for that. When Marcus walked through the door, Derek was sitting on the couch with his laptop, working on some music production software. He looked up, and his expression immediately changed. "Dude," Derek said, "why are you home? Don't you have a flight?" Marcus set down his bag and collapsed onto the couch next to him. "I got suspended." "What? Why?" And Marcus told him the whole story. He told him about the necklace, about the 7 years of invisibility, about the moment when something inside him had broken. He told him about the rage, about the words he'd said to Steve Harvey, about the way the entire cabin had gone quiet. Derek listened without interrupting. When Marcus finished, Derek was quiet for a long moment. "So you yelled at Steve Harvey?" Derek finally said. "Yeah." "On a plane?" "Yeah." Derek started laughing. Not a cruel laugh, but a genuine, surprised laugh. "Bro, that's insane. That's absolutely insane. Do you know what you've done?" "I've destroyed my career," Marcus said flatly. "No, do you know what you've done to Steve Harvey?" Derek leaned forward, his eyes bright. "Do you have any idea who that guy is? He's huge, like massive. If this gets out, if people find out that Steve Harvey got humiliated by a flight attendant, that's going to be everywhere." Marcus felt something twist in his stomach. He hadn't thought about it that way. He'd been so focused on his own anger, his own pain, that he hadn't really considered the impact on Steve Harvey. He'd just seen the necklace, seen the symbol of everything he wasn't, and lashed out. "It's already out," Marcus said quietly. "People recorded it." Derek's expression changed. "How many people?" "I don't know. A lot." Derek immediately pulled out his phone and started searching. His fingers flew across the screen, and Marcus watched as his roommate's expression shifted from amusement to shock to something darker. "Oh, man," Derek whispered. "Oh, man, this is bad." "What?" Marcus leaned over to look at the phone. Derek turned the screen toward him. There were already videos appearing on social media. Multiple angles of the incident, all uploaded within the last few hours. The comments were pouring in. Some people were defending Marcus, calling him brave for standing up to celebrity privilege. But most people were calling him unprofessional, unstable, a disgrace to his profession. And the videos were spreading fast. Within an hour, the incident had been picked up by major news outlets. "Flight attendant verbally assaults Steve Harvey over necklace," read one headline. "Airline workers' shocking outburst caught on video," read another. The clips were being shared thousands of times, being analyzed, being dissected. And slowly, inevitably, people started to identify Marcus. His name appeared in a Reddit thread, then on Twitter, then on a news site that had tracked down his social media accounts. By evening, his Facebook page had been flooded with comments. Some supportive, many vicious. People were calling him crazy, unstable, jealous. They were making jokes about him. They were digging through his history, looking for ammunition. His mother called him, panicked, asking what was happening. His sister sent him worried texts. His best friend from high school reached out to see if he was okay. But Marcus barely responded to any of it. He sat on the couch next to Derek, watching his life unfold in real time on the internet, feeling strangely detached from the whole thing. He'd wanted to be seen. He'd wanted to matter. And now he was being seen by millions of people. He was mattering in the way that people matter when they've done something wrong, when they've become a cautionary tale, when they've become a meme. This wasn't the kind of mattering he'd wanted. But it was mattering nonetheless. And the worst part? It was just beginning. By the next morning, Marcus was famous. Not the kind of famous he'd imagined. Not the kind of famous that came with respect or admiration. He was the kind of famous that came with contempt, with mockery, with the kind of attention that felt like being stabbed repeatedly in the chest. He woke up to find that his name was trending on Twitter. Marcus, the flight attendant, was everywhere. There were memes of him. There were think pieces about entitlement in the service industry. There were hot takes about privilege and jealousy and the dangers of unchecked resentment. And there were videos. So many videos. The original clip had been viewed over 50 million times. News outlets had picked it up and run it on their morning shows. Late-night comedians were making jokes about it. People were creating parodies, remixes, compilations of the moment set to different music. Marcus was the internet's favorite villain, and he hadn't even done anything that bad. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what Steve Harvey had said. The celebrity had released a statement early that morning, and it had been shared across every platform. Marcus read it with a sinking feeling in his chest. "I want to address what happened on my flight yesterday. I was treated disrespectfully by a crew member who made some hurtful accusations about my character and my success. I want to be clear. I didn't deserve that treatment. No one deserves to be verbally assaulted for wearing a necklace or for being successful. But I also want to say that I understand this person was struggling. I've been in difficult places too. I hope he gets the help he needs. I'm not pressing charges, and I'm not pursuing legal action. I just hope he finds peace." It was the perfect statement. It was gracious. It was forgiving. It made Steve Harvey look like a saint and made Marcus look like an ungrateful, troubled person who'd attacked an innocent man. And it was absolutely devastating. The internet had already turned against Marcus, but this statement sealed his fate. People who might have sympathized with him, who might have understood his frustration with the service industry, now saw him as someone who'd attacked a genuinely good person. Steve Harvey's forgiveness made Marcus's anger look unreasonable, childish, pathetic. By noon, Marcus had been fired. The airline sent him an official letter, delivered by courier, terminating his employment for conduct unbecoming of an airline employee, and creating a hostile environment for passengers and crew. They were also launching a formal investigation. They were cooperating with any potential legal action that Steve Harvey might pursue. The letter was polite but absolute. Marcus was done. Finished. Blacklisted. He sat on his bed, holding the letter, feeling like the ground had disappeared beneath him. For 7 years, that job had been his anchor. It had been unstable in many ways, but it had been his. It had paid his bills. It had given him structure. It had given him an identity, even if that identity was invisible flight attendant. Now he had nothing. Derek tried to be supportive. He made Marcus breakfast, told him that this would blow over, that the internet had a short attention span. But they both knew it wasn't true. This wasn't going to blow over. This was going to follow Marcus for the rest of his life. Every job interview, every background check, every Google search of his name would bring up this incident. He'd made himself unforgettable, and now he was going to pay for it forever. By evening, the harassment had started. People had found his social media accounts and were leaving comments. Some were just insulting, calling him names, telling him he was a loser, a failure, a disgrace. But others were darker. They were threatening. They were finding his address, sharing it online, suggesting that someone should teach him a lesson. Marcus had to delete his social media accounts. He had to change his phone number. He had to stop going outside because he was terrified that someone would recognize him and confront him. He'd wanted to be seen. Now he was being seen by people who hated him. On the 3rd day after the incident, Marcus's mother came to visit him. She took the subway from her apartment in the Bronx, and when she arrived, she looked exhausted. She was a nurse, worked long shifts, and the last thing she needed was to worry about her son having a public meltdown. "Marcus," she said, sitting on the couch next to him, "what were you thinking?" He didn't have an answer for her. How could he explain it? "I was invisible," he finally said. "For 7 years, I was invisible, and I couldn't do it anymore." His mother took his hand. She had kind eyes, tired eyes, eyes that had seen a lot of struggle. "Baby, being invisible doesn't mean you're not worth anything. It means you're not getting the recognition you deserve. But that doesn't mean you get to hurt people." "I didn't hurt him," Marcus said. "I just said some words." "You humiliated him on a plane full of people," his mother said gently. "You made him feel small, and now look what's happening to you. Is this what you wanted?" Marcus didn't answer, because the truth was complicated. Part of him had wanted this. Part of him had wanted to make Steve Harvey feel small, to prove that he had power, that he mattered. And he had done that. For a brief moment, he had mattered. He had been seen. He had made an impact. But the impact had been destructive. And now he was paying the price. His mother stayed for a few hours, made him promise to call her every day, and then left. After she was gone, Marcus sat in the darkness of his apartment and thought about what came next. He had maybe 3 months of savings. He had no job prospects. No one was going to hire him now. He had a reputation as someone unstable, someone who would lash out at customers, someone who couldn't handle pressure. He was worse off than he'd been before. He'd thought that being seen would solve his problems. He'd thought that mattering would make him feel better. But all it had done was destroy the fragile stability he'd built. And the worst part, he still felt invisible. Because being famous for being a villain wasn't the same as being seen. Being infamous wasn't the same as being valued. He'd traded invisibility for notoriety, and it was a terrible trade. On the 4th day, something unexpected happened. Marcus received an email from a lawyer. The subject line read, "Potential opportunity." He almost deleted it, assuming it was spam or a scam. But something made him open it. The email was from a lawyer named David Chen, who represented a law firm that specialized in employment law and workers' rights. The email read, "Dear Mr. Marcus, I've been following your situation with interest. I believe you may have a strong case against your former employer for wrongful termination and creating a hostile work environment. The airline industry has a documented history of mistreating service workers, and your case could be precedent-setting. I'd like to meet with you to discuss your options. Please call me at your earliest convenience. Best regards, David Chen." Marcus read the email 3 times, trying to understand what it meant. A lawyer wanted to help him? Someone thought he had a case? He called the number, and David Chen answered on the second ring. "Marcus, thank you for calling," David said. His voice was warm, professional, genuinely interested. "I've been following your situation, and I think there's a real opportunity here. The airline industry relies on the invisibility of service workers. They count on workers like you not speaking up, not making waves. And when you do, they punish you for it." "But I did speak up," Marcus said. "I yelled at a passenger. That's against the rules." "True," David agreed. "But the way they've handled it is problematic. They've fired you without due process. They've essentially blacklisted you from the industry. And they've done it in a way that's designed to make an example of you, to discourage other workers from speaking up." Marcus felt something shift inside him. For the first time since the incident, someone was validating his experience. Someone was suggesting that maybe he wasn't crazy, maybe his anger wasn't unjustified, maybe the system was actually rigged against people like him. "What do you want me to do?" Marcus asked. "I want you to let me help you," David said. "I want to file a lawsuit against the airline. I want to make this about more than just you. I want to make this about workers' rights, about the exploitation of service industry employees, about the systemic invisibility that companies like yours depend on." And just like that, Marcus's story changed direction again. He'd thought his moment of visibility was over. He'd thought he'd destroyed his life with one outburst. But maybe, just maybe, he'd started something bigger than himself. Maybe his invisibility could become a symbol. Maybe his anger could fuel a movement. Maybe being seen could actually mean something after all.